what evil lurks in the hearts of men. The shadow knows.
Now, where were we? Oh, right. After the success of Blood and Judgment despite controversy, Andy Helfer took over and wrote a monthly series. However, Helfer could not save the ship. His series was even more confusing and over the top than anything Chaykin had done, producing muddled stories, violent moments which were there for no real reason other than to be violent, not because they were completely necessary to the plot or characters, as well as throwing in a crew of new agents who consisted of ridiculous stereotypes like a drug-using psychopath, a wrestling masseuse, and even Cranston's two Oriental sons, though no proper explanation was ever given for them. But even after all this, the nail in the coffin would be issue 19, which had the Shadow's head fixed onto a robot, given in the previous stories he was killed and his head was cut off. And if you already didn't quite believe that, here's actual panels from the comic to prove that yes, somebody actually greenlit this. Helfer would never adequately explain why he chose to do this, except the usual spiel about wanting to do different things with the character and take it in new directions. However, from the perspective of both Shadow fans and the public in general, Helfer's ideas had officially gone round the bend and they were sick of it, as indicated by the decreasing sales of the comic, and so the series was finally axed after 19 issues, at long last ending what was and still is considered one of the worst runs in the Shadow's entire history. But luckily for irritated fans, there was an alternative. Around the same time, Marvel had gained the rights to produce a graphic novel of the character, and the classic team of Kaluta and O'Neill was brought on, returning the character firmly back to his period roots with the story Hitler's Astrologer, which was promptly praised by fans, especially given the alternative. And nearly at the very end of the 80s, after the bizarre events and innumerable twists and turns that had been the Chaykin and Helfer years, DC decided to give the character one more chance. And with that, the Shadow Strikes debuted in January of 1989, headed up by a new team, Gerard Jones, the writer, and Eduardo Barreto, who took up art duties. This series would return the Shadow to his native 1930s and restore a lot of the elements of the pulps, and was promptly praised as probably the best run since O'Neill and Kaluta in the 70s, and a welcome return to form after the over-the-top revisionism of Chaykin and Helfer. And the series would go on to run for 31 issues, making it the longest series as of 2012 since the original comics in the 40s. And among its notable elements were it would mark the first crossover between the Shadow and Street and Smith's other big icon, Doc Savage, as well as a welcome return of Shi Wang Khan, a battle against the Chicago mob featuring real mob figures such as Frank Nitti, and even in the last two issues exploring how Ken Allard, the Shadow's real identity, met the millionaire Lamont Cranston and adopted his identity, which he so often used in the pulps. And so, well into the 90s now, Dark Horse Comics, best known for titles like The Mask, would try their luck with the Shadow. And now, Mike Kaluta would not just be doing artwork, but would also be writing this new story, and would in fact go on to produce 3 series, with the assistance of others. Coils of Leviathan, Hell's Heat Wave, and a collection of short stories called The Shadow and the Mysterious 3. The continuing publishing of new adventures of the Night of Darkness proved that there was still marketability and life in the character yet, and in many ways was the lead up to the next major thing, the 1994 film starring Alec Baldwin, Penelope Ann Miller, John Lone, and Tim Curry, and directed by the man who gave us Highlander, Russell Mulcahy. and with a then healthy budget of $40 million behind it. The film, which was an adaptation of the Shiwan Khan stories as well as taking cues from the radio show by combining the Pulp Shadow's appearance, agents, and weapons with the invisibility powers and oriental training of the radio character, was meant to be the beginning of a new superhero franchise over at Universal, and as you'd expect, there were many types of merchandise such as toys, a pinball machine, stationery, trading cards, and there was even going to be a Super Nintendo beat-em-up released. However, the film's success led to its cancellation. To be more precise, the film, while not a bomb, wasn't exactly the runaway hit that Universal hoped it would be, grossing only $48 million against its $40 million budget, and receiving mixed reviews. Also seemingly cancelled as the byproduct of this was a rumored Shadow animated series which, like Batman the Animated Series, would have used Art Deco design, and from the few clips that exist online, seem to also be in black and white, though this was possibly test footage. However, despite all this, the film was later a success when released on home media like video and DVD, and has enjoyed a re-evaluation and cult following of sorts, with some even arguing that this is one of the reasons why the character even exists or is known about these days. However, the film's lackluster performance would not be the only disappointment for fans. Not long after, Dark Horse released two crossovers, one with Doc Savage and the other with one of Dark Horse's own, the crime fighter Ghost, which would not enjoy the praise or success that Kaluta's runs had. And now begins the last leg of our journey into the new millennium. In this time, the Shadow has enjoyed a revival of sorts. The home video success of the '94 film, as well as reprints of the pulp novels courtesy of Nostalgia Ventures, and multiple reissues of the radio show on CD, as well as being available to download digitally. Furthermore, the new millennium also signaled a new Shadow series. In 2012, Dynamite, who also handled other classic characters such as Zorro and the Green Hornet, began publishing a new series of Shadow comics written by acclaimed writer Garth Ennis and drawn by Aaron Campbell, with a number of variant covers drawn by the likes of Alex Ross, and even the man whose actions would lead to the chain event that would cause the Shadow's head to be stuck on a robot, Howard Chaykin. The new series began in April with the multi-part story The Fire of Creation, set during one of the Japanese-Chinese wars in the 1930s. But on top of all of this is the continuing rumors that Sam Raimi will be making a new Shadow film sometime soon. In fact, Raimi himself has said that it's one of his top priorities, although there have been various stories flying about, including two untrue ones about Quentin Tarantino and David Slade being up for the director's seat, as well as a couple of different scripts and rumored scripts flying around, such as one where the Shadow teams up with other Street and Smith characters like Doc Savage and the Avenger, and another where he fights a criminal mastermind and rapist whose appearance is very similar to that of the classic Wesley Dodds Sandman. However, none of these have been confirmed to be true. But what's even more interesting is the fact that one of Sam's early films, Darkman, was in fact the byproduct of his attempting to get a Shadow movie made. When the rights were denied, he went ahead and created his own character, which, aside from having a shadowy influence, was also influenced by other classic things from the 30s, most notably the Universal monster films. But now, when all is said and done and we've gone over the history of the character, what is the big thing, the major claim to fame that the Man in Black has? Well, let's take a quick trip back to the 1970s again. Around the same time that O'Neill was working on The Shadow, he was also writing Batman. And in 2 issues, he actually had the 2 Knights of Darkness cross over and meet. The inspiration meeting the inspired. And with it, unveiling one of the little-known secrets of comic history at the time. Something which one could argue Bob Kane tried to bury long ago. Just take a look at the panels here and you will see. Still not fully convinced? Bill Finger, the co-creator of Batman and the man who some Batman fans and historians have argued was steamrolled by Kane, admitted in an interview that the first Batman story, The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, was in fact a page-for-page knockoff of the Shadow Pulp story, Partners of Peril. What's even more interesting, though, is that this novel wasn't actually written by Walter Gibson. It was written by one of his associates, Theodore Tinsley, who would from time to time step in to write when Gibson couldn't or had other business to attend to. In many respects, we owe it to Gibson's character, but even more so to Tinsley's writing, that one of our most popular and for many favorite superheroes, Batman, even exists today. Boy, that's quite an origin story. And thus we have reached the end of our great journey across the career of perhaps one of the most important literary characters of the 20th century, and the man to whom many of us owe one of our favorite mediums. And to think it all started 80 years ago with a simple brainstorming in an office for a radio show. Hope you've enjoyed this series, hope you've learnt something, and, well, hopefully with the help of Dynamite and Sam Raimi finally getting the movie into production, The Shadow may someday enjoy a full-blown true revival and rightfully take his place in the pantheon of the many heroes he helped to inspire. But who knows?
The Shadow knows.